This is the first video in a series of 3. The first one is going to be very basics of factoring a trinomial. Then we'll look at factoring a trinomial when our first term is not a 1. And then lastly, we'll look at factoring a trinomial using special factoring rules. So the first thing you want to do when you have a trinomial, let's just say we have x squared plus 7x plus 12, and we want to factor this trinomial. The first thing that you want to do is make sure that our trinomial is in decreasing powered order. So I have x squared, x to the first, and 12x. Okay, so that's the very first thing. The next thing you'll want to do is we're going to have to look at this last number 12. Sorry, first we want to make sure that we have a 1 on our x squared. After that, let's look at the 12. And we need to think of the factors of 12. Okay, and then we have to combine that with what's in the second term, the 7x. So we're going to look at the factors of 12. So if I have 12 here, the factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 6 and 2, or 3 and 4. So those are the things that multiply to get to 12. You just want pairs. You don't want to break it up into more factors than that. So what pairs factor to or multiply to 12? Then after we do that, we need to see here, what of these factors add or subtract to get to 7? All right, well, 1 plus 12 is 13. 12 minus 1 is 11, so those don't get to 7. 6 plus 2 is 8. Close, but not quite. 6 minus 2 is 5. So those two do not work. The last one is 3 and 4. 3 plus 4 is 7. So these are going to be our factors that work in our pair. Now, what we need to do is break that up. So I have x as my b term. So that is what is going to go in my first spot. If I had x squared in my middle term, then x squared is what would go in my first spot here. Okay. Then, because it's both positive 3 and positive 4, we have x plus 3 and x plus 4. And we have factored the trinomial. Alright, let's look at some steps or hints that we need to use for factoring, and we will apply them to a couple of problems. Okay, so the very first thing would be to always write in decreasing order. You will often see that idea written as ax squared plus bx plus c. So that's what decreasing order means. So you have the ax squared plus bx plus c. Sometimes you'll hear the x squared term referred to as the a term. Then you have the b term as the x value, and the c term is the constant. So you want to always write your polynomials in that decreasing powered order. So the next step, or I guess this would be more of a hint, is that if the last term is positive, so the c term here, if this term is positive, then the two factors of c that go into our binomial factoring must have the same sign. And that is because a positive times a positive is positive, and a negative times a negative is positive. So that sign, the sign that the two factors will have, will be based off of whatever the b term is. So if b was positive, then these both would be positive. If b was negative, then these factors will both have a negative sign. Okay? The last little hint here has to do with if the last term is negative. So if the last term is negative, so if our c here is a negative, so a minus c, then the only way you can get a negative is if you have a positive times a negative. So you must have opposite signs. The signs will depend on if the b term is actually positive or negative. So if your last term, your c term is negative, then the order of the signs will depend on what b is. If this b term is positive, then the larger factor of c must be the positive number in your factoring. If the b term is negative, then the larger factor of c must be the negative number. So those three will be helpful in actually having you factor. So let's look at some examples using those ideas. Alright, our first example here is x squared minus 7x plus 10. So let's look at how we would factor that. So we're going to look at the factors of our last term here, the 10. So the factors of 10 are 1 and 10 and 2 and 5. So because my last term is positive, the factors have to have the same sign when we go and put them into the binomial factoring. We know that it's going to be an x here and an x here. And then, since they both have to be positive, to tell if they're going to be positive in the factors or negative in the factors, we have to look at that 7x. Since it is a negative 7x, then our factors have to be negative. So if I have negative 1 minus or plus negative 10, that's negative 11. So that does not equal 7. Negative 2 plus negative 5 is 7, negative 7. So those would be our factors. And then we have factored our trinomial. Alright, here's our next one. So let's look at the factors of 15 are 1 and 15. There's no way we're going to get to 2 with 1 and 15. So then the other factors would be 5 and 3. So that looks kind of promising. Let's take a look at that. So if I have negative 15, because my last term is negative, the two signs have to be opposite. So since they're opposite signs, let's look at the b term. My b term is the 5 is the one that's going to be positive. The other one has to be negative. So if we go and factor that then, remember when we're factoring, we're trying to take these numbers and put them into their two factors. So it's reverse foiling. We have x and x because my b term is an x. And we know our 5 is the one that has to be positive because my b term is positive. That makes my smaller number, the 3, negative. And there we go. There's the factoring. Alright, the last one that I want to look at is x squared minus 5x minus 24. So we have this in the right order, x squared minus 5x minus 24. So what we want to do first is let's look at the factors of 24. 24, I'm going to need a little more space because there's a little bit more factors. 1 and 24. We're not going to get to 5 with that, so we can cancel that out automatically. We have 2 and 12, a little closer, but still not quite. 6 and 4, and 8 and 3. So those are the ones that we need to take a closer look at. We know that my last term is negative, so these two need to be opposite signs. Alright, so really what you want to do, since they're opposite signs, we're going to subtract them. 6 minus 4 is 2, so that does not give us 5. 8 minus 3 is 5. So that will give us the 5 we need. So the one that works is this 8 and 3. Now let's decide which one will need to be the positive and which one will be the negative, since they do have to be opposite sides. Well, my B term here is negative, so that means my bigger number will have to be negative. So the 8 must be the negative, the 3 will be the positive, and there you are. The best way to get good at these is practicing. The more you practice factoring, the more it's going to be like riding a bike. You just pick it up really fast. The next video we'll take a look at what we need to do when that x squared is not a 1. It's a little more tricky.